We know that data can be stored in two different ways. We can either use a constant if the data stays the same or a variable if the data has to be changed. Now we can store different types of data in these variables and constants. This can range from numbers to words and everything in between. So far we've mostly worked with numbers, and each type brings a new challenge in syntax to the arena. Collection types are an important part of Swift. It allows the computer to understand what type of data it is working with. There are two different ways to declare what type we're using. It always seems like you have to tell the computer everything. But this time we get a break. Don't judge a programming language by its emoticon. Remember that you can either declare variables or initialize them. Each of these ways to create variables come with its very own syntax. First, we'll show you variable declaration in action. Swift can infer what type we are using. Infer means to figure out what the type is. We can also declare what type we are using through declaration. In the example above, we are telling Swift what type of variable we want to create. In this case, type is an integer. An integer is a whole number, whether positive or negative. Programming languages love to use fancy words for everything. Here's some top-secret information on type safety. Since Swift is a type-safe language, we haven't had any type-related injuries recently. If we tell Swift that we are using a certain collection type, then it makes sure we really are, and will prevent us from using a different one. This overall reduces potential problems with your programs. The other way we can declare a type is something we've already done before. With this example, Swift infers the type we are using instead of needing us to declare it. Here the type is still an integer. However, Swift is figuring that out on its own. You use this example when you already know the value. It's best to use the previous example if you aren't sure yet. Or you can choose. It's a personal choice too. In Swift, your collection type always has to match up. That means if you store a string inside your variable, then you can't store a number in the same variable. You aren't allowed to change what is inside the box. Once you tell Swift you are using a certain type, you can change it. Here the wizard has a box labeled fruitcakes. Inside the box you would expect there to either be a fruitcake inside or the amount of fruitcakes. What you wouldn't expect is a herd of sheep. But wait. The wizard opened the box and inside is a sheep. This is why it's important to name your variables properly. If you don't name your variables based on what's inside, you'll make yourself and other programmers confused. What you would expect to find inside your variable named fruitcakes is the amount of fruitcakes you have. Inside this variable we would have 2 fruitcakes. Always remember to name your variables based on what is inside. Here's another example of Swift using fancy words for things we already know. Strings are strings of characters. A character is just a letter or one of the other symbols. So that means strings are actually words. Cactus is a string. Declaring a string is done in 2 ways that we described in the introduction section. In the first example we already have the plant variable assigned to a string. In the second example we would need to assign the value later in the code. Strings are used to keep text that users have entered. They're also used for keeping necessary words stored in variables. Their usage can range from anything as simple as names to something as complex as a password. This is the type we have the most experience with already. Remember, an integer is a whole number which can be positive or negative. The shortened version for integer and the one we use in programming is int. An example of an int is 10. We typically use numbers to represent a value and name it accordingly. Declaring an int is also done in the same two ways as a string. In the first example, we already have the value assigned and Swift infers it as an int. In the second version, we are declaring it for the computer and would need to assign a value later. Integers are typically used for storing the amount of something. They are also commonly used for math operations. Integers can even be used as a counter to determine how many times something happened. This is a new type we don't have any experience with yet. You learn something new every day. Programmers learn something new every time they code. The shortened version of Boolean is bool. A Boolean is a form of data that can take only two possible values. The only two values of a Boolean are true or false. That's pretty easy. Seems kind of similar, doesn't it? That's because it is. Declaring a Boolean is the same as declaring any of the other types. Or var door is open, bool. With the first example, it reads like plain English. Swift infers it as a bool. With the second declaration, we will have to assign the value later. Booleans are really simple. We use them to determine if something is true or if it is false. An example would be this is another new type. Wow. We've really come a long way. The shortened version of double is, well, double. Nothing fancy this time. A double is a number with a decimal value. An example of this would be 43.78343. Even for this one, the syntax is the same. We just have a new type, but still declare it the same way. The first example is already declared and inferred, but that tax percentage is really high. Maybe we should use the second one and declare a better number later, like 0%. Doubles are only used when we need a decimal value. This is common for when we are doing math or just need to store something that isn't an integer. This type is also for decimal values but does not provide the same accuracy as a double. We will be using doubles throughout this course because it doesn't round off decimal numbers. This helps us to retain the value we store in our variable. If you're coming from other programming languages, float may be familiar. We can use floats when we have smaller decimals, such as when we have change from buying a snack. Doubles are used when longer decimal amounts are necessary. Floats aren't very common in Swift compared to doubles, which are more frequently used. In this lesson we learned about the different data types in Swift. We also learned the different ways in which we can initialize variables with different types or how to declare variables with collection types. Great job! You've been doing so good so far. Keep working at it and you'll be a pro before you know it.